The Vice President.
Minister is in me. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. We are all duty bearers, and our vulnerable are certainly rights holders. And the glue that unites us is the principle of respect. I quote here my newfound friend, Rona Julia van Oudenhoven, who is a visiting lecturer at UE and the editor of a book, Diversity, Dialogue, and Exercise in Inclusion. Mr. Vice President, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this debate, which stirs my passion for the human rights of children. I thank Senator Richards for his foresight in bringing this important motion, and I thank Senator Mark for affording it precedence above his own. I always knew there was some hope for him. He was hurt when I disowned him, but Lent is a time for penance. I have vowed to have a good Lenten season. I had Ashes on Ash Wednesday, although I spent the entire carnival weekend working in my study. I went to church last Friday for Wear the Cross, a popular Catholic Lenten ritual. My mother used to have us doing Calvary on Sour Hill, where we were born, and also up Mount St. Benedict. Maybe she thought when children learn Stations of the Cross, they do not end up in the police station. The second Station of the Cross is Jesus takes up his cross. Now, in my church, there's a booklet with reflections on each station, and the particular reflection spoke about parents and the crosses they have to bear. I became very upset when I read that one of the crosses that parents had to bear was retarded children. I take great exception to that word retarded when used with reference to children with disabilities. Indeed, I had to write a letter to the press in 2017 and complained to the editor when I saw a bus in Port of Spain with children inside, and emblazoned on the side were the words, Trinidad and Tobago Association for Retarded Children. It would be a great irony if they were the ones responsible for the beautiful advertisement also in the press, open your mind, discover the ability and disability. So I must say I engaged with Senator Richards when he talked about the importance of language in dealing with children with disabilities. So after the Stations of the Cross, I relayed my concern to a church leader who promised that next week we will have another set of booklets which did not include the offensive word. We must be sensitive about how we name and shame people with special needs in our society. Now, the 3rd of March was not only Carnival Sunday. It was a special day for people with disabilities. It was World Birth Defects Day. I hadn't heard about that day before until I was invited by a lady who's big in the dance of disabilities, Dr. Dick. And she asked if I would participate in a webinar today, but it's going on today, and I'm here. In researching the matter, I learned that birth defects were congenital anomalies and were classified as structural or functional defects. Structural defects being congenital malformations such as cleft lip or cleft palate, spina bifida, limb deficiency, clubfoot, Down syndrome, and Zika syndrome, etc. While functional defects were metabolic diseases such as hypothyroidism, sickle cell, cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, deafness, autism, ADHD, and so on. Now, I was born with a structural defect, so I know what it is to suffer through being a curiosity, being a subject of old wives' tales, unkind remarks, and teasing, now called bullying, rather than being properly diagnosed. I had other congenital effects, God to put special attention to me. And when I delivered the feature address at the AGM of the Midwives Association some years ago, I shared with them that the umbilical cord was wrapped so tightly around my body that the midwife asked my mother, "You think this one will live?" And my mother said, "That is God's will." When my father returned home with my older siblings, who had gone by my aunt until the plane bringing me had passed, he said, "Another girl again?" But as luck would have it, I resembled him the most. But because of my experiences, I have a special interest in children with disabilities. Now, Trinidad and Tobago ratified the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, the CRC, in December '91. And we vowed then that we would give children all their rights, without discrimination of any kind, including on the grounds of disability. Article 23 of the CRC speaks to the right of a mentally or physically disabled child to enjoy a full and decent life in conditions which ensure dignity, promote self-reliance, and facilitate the child's active participation in the community. Article 28 speaks to the right of the child to education, and Article 29 states that education of the child shall be directed to the development of the child's personality, talents, and mental and physical abilities to their fullest potential. And we've heard Senator Richards and the Honorable Minister talk about the Constitution. But the right to education is proclaimed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and reaffirmed in the World Declaration on Education for All. So having ratified the CRC, Caribbean governments met together in a session of a very important conference, the Caribbean Conference on the Rights of the Child in Belize City in 1996. And at that conference, at which we were represented by Minister Manohar Ramsaran, as he was at the time, they formulated, the ministers there, a commitment to action for the rights of the child. And among those commitments was to generate and sustain the necessary political will to protect child rights, to reduce disparities, violence, and discrimination among our people, and to promote better social integration. We promised to review and revise the relevant laws, policies, and programs to fully comply with the letter and the spirit of the CRC. And sometimes we forget the spirit, and we remember only the letter. We promised to establish effective mechanisms to enhance these laws and to implement these policies and programs to ensure that the best interests of the child are afforded the primary consideration and their rights are enjoyed without discrimination of any kind, irrespective of inter alia, disability, or other status. So how are we doing? How are we doing with all these promises that we made to children? We have an obligation under the CRC, under Article 44, to submit reports periodically to the United Nations Child Rights Committee. And as I said before when I first spoke in this chamber, having submitted the report, we, at the end of the day, we get a number of recommendations. They tell us the good things first, and then they tell us what we ought to do that we are not doing. And the committee, in its concluding observations, stated its concerns about the high prevalence of mental and physical disabilities among children in Trinidad and Tobago. They noted with concern that service provision for children with disabilities was heavily reliant on NGOs. There was no state-run residential institution available for children with physical and mental disabilities, and there were no special education assistance programs currently available. The committee recommended, among other things, a study to be done on the causes of disabilities affecting children, the provision of adequate resources, including monetary assistance to families and training of professionals in the field. Now, when I heard the minister speak about how wonderful we were doing in terms of our education system and in terms of children with disabilities, I remembered an experience I had some years ago. Having had a very positive encounter with the passport office, I felt constrained and duty-bound to write a letter to the press in praise of the passport office. They had assisted me greatly after my daughter had lost her passport in Venezuela, and she had to get back to university. She had no visa and all of that, so we had to really press. And I was very pleased with the response. The next day, Suren Capildeo, of blessed memory, my colleague, wrote a letter in the press too and said, are there 2 passport offices in Trinidad and Tobago? Because his experience was so different from mine. So when I hear what is happening from the ministry's end, and I hear what is happening from the end of the NGOs and other organizations, educational organizations that deal with children and disabilities, and even concerns expressed about the education system by high government officials and people who have been doing reports, I wonder, are there 2 education systems in Trinidad and Tobago? Because the one that the minister spoke of is not one that is easily recognizable by many people. I am happy to report, though, and I admit that there has been some progress, especially in the training of professionals. Mr. Vice President, I entered Teachers College when I was in my teens. I was a beneficiary of the vision of our founding father, Dr. Eric Williams, who felt that people should not go into classrooms and practice to teach on children. They should first learn to teach and then go into the classroom. So I entered Mosika Teachers Training College to learn to teach. Not to be a good woodsman, to learn to teach children. My first class was a standard 3 class. In that class, I met a child who just stared at me with her beautiful eyes. She followed me around with her eyes. She refused to do any work. She wouldn't even take the books out of her bag and spoke to no one. The other children in the class said, Miss, you know, we never hear her voice. I said, what? You're in class? 4 years they were together. She said, yes, miss. I tell you, miss, we're not lying. So I decided to investigate. I spoke to the principal, and he said, yes, he couldn't explain why this child had been promoted, what was the assessment used. But there she was in standard 3 in front of me, and I had never heard her voice. And nothing was happening. So I found out where she lived. I went to the home. To my surprise, I saw this child busy doing homework in the house. Nothing happening in school. So it became a battle of wills. Nothing was happening until you started work. And every day we were at it until she came in and she started to work. Eventually, she even passed common entrance. Now, I left the school not even understanding what was happening with her. Years after, I went to the Bahamas to teach, and Prime Minister Perry Christie, who has a special child, and he always takes it up to speak about his special child. And he appointed me to a committee, the National Commission on Special Education. It was a tremendous learning experience. I was responsible for looking at laws on special education, not only in the region, but around the world. And there it was that I learned that that child had a special condition as anxiety disorder called selective mutism. So she would talk in one place at home, but at school, nothing doing. Now, the University of Trinidad and Tobago is responsible for teacher education and has a program of training for a degree called Bachelor of Education Special Needs, and also primary school, and it prepares graduates to go out there in the general primary education schools and special schools. But there is a concern that the education system is geared towards academics, which tests all students by a written examination. Now, there's a document called the Framework for Action on Special Needs Education that came out from the World conference on special needs education organized by the government of Spain in cooperation with UNESCO and held in 1994. And it produced a Salamanca statement on principles, policy, and practice in special needs education. And the whole thrust of the standard is towards inclusivity in education, inclusion in education. And that principle of inclusion is what is guiding the education system insofar as special needs education is concerned. So it forms the framework, and it talks about accommodating all children, regardless of their physical, intellectual, social, emotional, linguistic, or other condition. And it also caters for gifted children. So the disabled and the gifted children. And when you look at what is happening out of the University of Trinidad and Tobago, they are also talking about inclusion in education. Because what the research is showing is that is the way to go. When I hear Beverly Beckles, and she is Madam National Center for Persons with Disabilities, CEO, she has been in this field for many, many years. You can't talk about disabilities and not know Dr. Beverly Beckles. And at a meeting with Transparency International, she talks about every single one of us, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, having a part to play in this education system to include everybody. So we have a number of institutions which are looking at a number of world bodies looking at inclusion in education. Now, the Committee on the Rights of the Child put out a general comment on the rights of children with disabilities. So we have the article in the CRC which deals with children with disabilities. And what the Committee on the Rights of the Child would normally do, as they did in juvenile education and as they did, as I said before, on the effect of multinationals and their work on children and their rights, they put out a document which is the General Comment number 9, the Rights of Children with Disabilities. And again, the document talks about the movement towards inclusive education. And they say at its core, inclusive education is a set of values, principles, and practices that seeks meaningful, effective, and quality education for all students that does justice to the diversity of learning conditions and requirements not only of children with disabilities, but for all students. So this is where the world is moving, towards inclusion. Because when you look at separating children, and I know the motion talks about having separate schools, but the way to go, but you're seeing the trend towards in all parts of the world, and coming from the Child Rights Committee is look at inclusion. Because when you separate the children, you have a different standard most times. You have a stigma attached to children who are in special schools. They are marked, and you have most times lower expectations from them. When we were going to school, a number of us, there was a trend towards streaming. You have the A, somebody spoke earlier about the A stream and the B stream and the C stream. But when you put children together in a similar environment, and you put special ways of dealing with the disparity in learning, you get better results. And that is the way that we ought to be going. Now, when you look at government's National Children's Policy 2018 to 2028, you see that the government is looking at a number of strategic objectives. And it talks also about enhancing access to quality education services, including early childhood education and learning opportunities, and providing support to family environments and caregivers, and all of these things. So one wonders, How is it that the government is recognizing that we need to do certain things with education? How is it that we've set up certain task force and we've done so many things, and yet we're hearing that everything more or less is fine with our education system? It cannot be. There's a discord, and no, there's something, that the two things can be right. So what is really happening in our education system? I have been hearing about early childhood centers that are closed. There has been a chat that I've been included in, and there are people who have been in education for many years, and they are worried about what is happening with early childhood education, because the research shows that early childhood education, and there's a big document on it, is really the equalizer. You take children early and work with them, they have a better chance in life than children who go to school late. And the thing about it is that even earlier than early childhood education, the assessment of children should start early. So what should be happening is that the Minister of Education should be working in tandem with the Minister of Health to make sure that the health visitors who go to the homes after the mothers have their babies and who know of specific problems even before birth, that these children are assessed. A lot of exciting things are happening in the Ministry of Health, I've heard and I've seen with my own eyes. And you need to have a closer working relationship with the Ministry of Health in terms of the children's health and assessment and the Ministry of Education. I have read time and time again in the newspaper a cry from people engaged in early childhood education. And that cry is about the money that they are not being paid, and when they are being paid a very small sum of money. And I cannot understand, if early childhood education is so vital, and this is in no doubt, why are we treating those people who deliver education in that way? So they go to the colleges or they go to some institution and they come out qualified as early childhood educators, and we give them $2,500 a month. Really? Why don't, I mean, maybe they should feel they should better go and work on one of the fast food outlets. We cannot be treating people who are delivering an education at a very vital level, and expect that they will be happy with what they're doing. Now, we're training teachers, and we're giving them a bachelor's degree in special education and primary education. And when you look and you see what is happening with them when they go back out in their schools, they are still fighting with the CPO to be classed as specialist teachers. So they have a more rigorous program for the teachers who are in the general primary school level. And they have to do a lot of specialist subjects. They have to learn Braille, they have to learn sign language, and a number of things. And they go back, having gone through this program and done specialist training, and they are paid the same amount of money. What is the incentive? So you have fewer numbers who are going into the program, and sometimes they might think it is better for them to emigrate than to stay in a system that is not giving them the appreciation that they deserve. So if we are serious about the importance of special education, we ought to treat our teachers who devote their lives because they have a special love for children. We have to treat them better if we want them to remain in the system. Now, we heard about a number of good things are happening. We heard about people who are going into the system, and they are interpreters and so on, and they are able to deal with children with disabilities. But what we did not hear is that when the school year opened, some weeks passed before they were put into the school system. So for that period of time, the interpreters were not there. And then when some of them went into the system, they left a few weeks after. And we need to probe, why did that happen? What was the level of dissatisfaction that they felt that they needed to move out of the system of education where they were well placed because of their qualifications? Now, there are a number of risk factors attached to criminality, and one of these risk factors is lack of educational attainment. Some years ago, I was a member of a group, Alternatives to Custody group, and we used to go into YTC. And I remember on one occasion sitting with the young men, and the level of literacy and numeracy was mind-boggling. And I'm saying, all of these people passing through the system, and they leave not knowing how to read, not knowing how to count. Where is the assessment process going on? What is happening with them? And I recall I was sitting in a conference, and there was a report, a study done by one of my colleagues. And he said, you know, we were going through a number of investigations about why children were becoming delinquent. And he said, you know, I dealt with the parents, I dealt with the children, I dealt with the teachers. And he said, you know, there's only one group that didn't take any responsibility for the children failing: the teachers. The parents, the thing. And he said, you know, what came out of it is that the children preferred to be thought of as bad than dumb. And therefore, I bad was better than I can't read, I can't write. And that is how they were reacting. Learning is something I consider very exciting. I was taught to love your subject and love your subjects. But it doesn't always happen like that in the system. I remember when the junior secondary was changing over to senior secondary, and I was asked to go in and assist these children. Language and literature. The boys who were in the craft classes, they had no interest. When I went and I called the roll, and I saw so few children, I said, where are these people? Miss, they're downstairs. I said, okay, you wait here. And I went all between the lockers, and I pick up a whole set of them, and I bring them in the classroom. And I spent most of that lesson explaining to them, even if you're a technician, whatever you're doing, people have a little more respect for you. If you know that the sign outside your door, that is spelled the words right. I say, when you're going home this evening, just check along the east-west corridor and see how many words you find on business places that are spelled incorrectly. And there was a young man who was resistant. And he swung around his chair to look at the playing field and was ignoring me. And I swung back the chair, and he stood up. And when he looked at me, I realized he was way up there. And he looked as though he wanted to cuff me down. But I always remember when I was in Cave Hill, and I had a problem with one of my colleagues, and I opened my eyes. He said, Gail, don't ever do that. You scare me. So I opened my eyes for him, and he sat back down. And we developed a relationship, and one day I'm walking down Ferry Street, and I said, Miss, good friends now. But you know, you had to show them that you cared. You have to try to develop the talents of the children, because everyone has a talent. And you need to nurture that talent and work with them. Before I left Mukurapo Senior that summer, I decided to do a program, and I did that improvisation. I just gave them the scenario, and they produced a skit They were so enthusiastic. They even, Hazel Brown lent me her heirloom, and in the excitement, they break the lady vase. I tell me I can't replace it, forget it. But those children had talent. So our children have talent in acting. We have talent in music. They have talent in so many things. And children who are perhaps autistic, they have even more talent sometimes than some children who are in regular school. And we ought to know what talents they have and what could be nurtured. And, you know, how can we best develop them? I remember a girl who, right through school, I was supposed to prepare for common entrance, and the poor child couldn't read. And one day I took her again and we did an improvisation. And that was the only time she enjoyed the respect of her peers. Man, the girl acted so well, you couldn't believe. She couldn't read anything, but she was able to create that scenario and act it out, and everybody was looking at her to wonder. And there were two of them like that, you know. So I used to try to use drama with them, a number of things. And I always remember when I inquired, one day they told me that one of them had committed suicide. You know, so there are so many children that we are losing. And when we're talking about nurturing our children, when we are talking about building children, we're talking about building a society. That's what we're looking at. We're saying, are we nurturing our future? What are we talking about? We're talking about these children who, if we don't get them to realize their full potential, we're losing a segment of our population that is important to us. And we have to work to make things better for them. The Autistic Society said they submitted a number of recommendations to a subcommittee of Parliament in 2016. And they're telling me that all of these recommendations, they were received by Parliament, and they are not seeing any results. A number of things they will send to the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality, and Diversity, the Autistic Society. A disability register, public awareness program, early expert diagnosis, multidisciplinary team, technical personnel, administrative team, support services, and it goes on and on and on. What is happening? So if we are really serious, we can't only be talking. There is a lot that can be done, even with our meager resources. And we hear about a lot of resources that are being spent. But it's how and where these resources are being spent. It reminds me of when we talk about how much money we spend in the Ministry of National Security. And we know the prisoners are not well taken care of. We know that the prison officers don't get any big salary. And we know the money is going elsewhere. So where is the money in education going? When you hear about student support service staff and they cannot get a new contract, they can't, you know, they are suffering weeks, months, and years. They're getting frustrated. And we boast about how many officers we have. And then we hear for primary school, we have so few. And there are so many problems. We learned recently about this chap who was shot, the two boys who were shot in the bathroom. What was interesting to me about that is the mother saying, he was a slow learner, easily influenced. So he was not quite normal. So here he is being led into criminality because his learning needs are not being addressed. And we have to attend to that. Now, we heard a lot about two men coming into the school and assaulting the principal. And out of that story, the part I looked at is this person, this child, was being abusive to teachers. The child was misbehaving. And I asked myself, were those issues addressed at all? Before it reached that stage where he was suspended? When are we going to start restorative practices in schools when we try to find out what happened? And let the child talk so we can learn about some of the things that are going on in these children's homes and their lives that make them angry, upset, want to attack others. What is the shame in their life? Because when you are shame because some affect, as we call it in restorative justice, is interrupted, there is no interest, no joy, no excitement in your life, then you attack others, you attack self, or you have avoidance, or other ways of dealing with shame. So we need to understand what is happening with the children before things burst out. And we need also to identify in a correct way children at risk. Children at risk are not only children who are poor, it's not only children who are perhaps the ordinary way we look at children at risk, they don't have certain services and so on, but children at risk whom we do not refer to the Children's Authority are sometimes children who are living with criminality. And there was a young man who was killed in the Chaguanas area, and afterwards you're hearing about his attendance record was dismal. And I asked myself, where are the truancy officers? Where are they? I understand we have them here, but where are they? Who is checking on children who are not coming to school? Out of, sorry? Thank you very much. Truancy, 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 T-R-U-A-N-C-Y, truancy officers, yeah. Yes, that's exactly what I mean, yeah, I'm sorry, truancy officers. So we have to look at these systems before things happen. We are very good at dealing with the aftermath, but we need to deal with the preventive aspect. And that one of the young men who was killed, his father was a gang leader. And I heard after that he was in a gang since he was 10 years old. The teachers had no problem with him. When he was in school, he was well behaved. Yes, sir, morning, sir. But he was exposed to criminality. So when he was shot, the teachers were not at all surprised. He was hardly ever in the school, but he never gave them problems. So you have all these sort of things. You have all these kind of hurts. There's a girl who used to look at me in the school, and I say, stay after class, I want to talk to you because something bothering me. She said, Miss, my father don't recognize me as his child, you know. And Miss, he just treats me so bad. He doesn't bring anything for me. And because I fair skin and everybody else that, he say, I'm not his child, Miss, and he don't bring nothing for me. How can a child study in those circumstances? So children are suffering hurt, and teachers need to pay attention. Social work people need to pay attention to not only the most obvious, sometimes badly behaved children, but sometimes the ones who are silent, the ones who are withdrawn. Just read up on the Columbine murders and the Virginia Tech and see those children who were outside of the mainstream. We like to say this child nice and quiet. We like them nice and quiet. But the quiet children are sometimes the ones who are suffering most. And we need to look at that. We need to examine our society and see where our values are. And we need also to understand the structural violence that is being done every day to our children. I thank you.
Eva, small and micro enterprise development.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Vice President, for the opportunity to join this debate and to contribute to the discussion on the ongoing national efforts towards addressing the needs of students with physical and learning disabilities. Mr. Vice President, well, I don't have much time. I just have about 13 minutes to contribute to this debate. But firstly, I want to remind that this government has always been cognizant of the need to empower persons with disabilities and to also provide them with the opportunity to exercise their freedoms and fundamental rights. However, Mr. Vice President, in addressing this very important issue, we must also view it through the lens of human rights and treat it with utmost priority. I want to speak a little on the international framework. The Sustainable Development Agenda 2030 establishes the importance of addressing the issues faced by persons with disabilities with goals for and 10, a specific reference, Mr. Vice President, to the matter under discussion today, the importance of growth, full employment, and equal education opportunities for persons with disabilities. This government, Mr. Vice President, is committed, is firmly enshrined as part of the international community's commitment in this area. In addition, Mr. Vice President, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which was ratified by this government, by the government of Trinidad and Tobago in 2015, represents a major step towards realizing the right of differently abled persons to be treated as full and equal citizens. Mr. Vice President, this government has been committed to ensuring that persons with disabilities are afforded and are able to enjoy such rights. We would have listened to the Honorable Minister of Education earlier when he would have outlined all the supporting mechanisms that are in place, including different grants to assist persons with disabilities in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, I wish to draw attention to the draft national policy on persons with disabilities, which was developed in line with the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Section 7.5 of the draft policy addresses work and employment for persons with disabilities. But Mr. Vice President, I would want to share with this Honorable House the fact that the primary role of the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development, our ongoing work, is in the area of improving decent work opportunities for all citizens, including those who belong to the most vulnerable groups. So that the ministry, in collaboration with the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services, commissioned a survey in 2016 to assess the willingness of employers to hire persons living with disabilities. And Mr. Vice President, I would want to share with this House the results, the finding of that survey. Now, using the National Employment Service database of employers in 2016, the ministry implemented this project to gather baseline data to inform us of the next steps. The specific objectives of this survey were: 1, to assess employers' attitudes, opinions on the hiring of persons with disabilities in their organizations. 2, to assess current employer practices and challenges by companies, size, and industry sector. 3, to assess the existence of any perceived challenges and concerns in hiring and retraining employees with disabilities, as well as identify the current strategies utilized to overcome these challenges. 4, to determine the possible opportunities for partnerships with organizations to facilitate the hiring of persons with disabilities. Mr. Vice President, the survey also included a range of specific questions aimed at assessing the level of support in the form of training and development afforded to persons with disabilities who were already in employment. Mr. Vice President, as expected, the survey produced a range of unique and interesting findings, which, together with the views of our varied stakeholders, are being used to reshape government's approach to expanding the range of opportunities available to persons living with disabilities. Mr. Vice President, I would just like to share some of the findings of this survey with this Honorable House. For ease of understanding, I've separated these findings into 5 subheadings, namely hiring, retention, training and development, barriers to hiring persons with disabilities, and partnerships. Under hiring, Mr. Vice President, 39% of the employers indicated that their organization recruits persons with disabilities, while 59% indicated that they do not. 72% of the respondents stated no to being aware of employees with disabilities in their place of employment, while 17% answered yes, with the remainder unsure or simply don't know. Mr. Vice President, approximately half of those above that responded yes indicated that the work of persons with disabilities were on par with other employees. With regards to the area of retention, the lack of legislation to encourage the employment of persons with disabilities, 42.6% of the respondents indicated that this specific area was responsible for they not employing persons with disabilities. They also cited lack of information on how to help employees who have acquired a disability to stay in the job or return to work after a period of recovery. Next, there was the perceived cost of accommodation. And in this context, accommodation referred to providing assistance or making changes in the job or workplace that would enable the worker to do the job. For example, establishing ramps, refurbishing toilet and other facilities to accommodate persons with disabilities. And lastly, lack of education and qualification of persons with disabilities. With regards to training and development, Mr. Vice President, 73% of employers conducted training and developmental programs. 20% of the 73% indicated that persons with disabilities also participated in the training programs. A key training area identified by employers is specific technical skills related to the job function. Mr. Vice President, barriers to hiring persons with disabilities, 77% of the employers indicated health and safety issues, while 69% of the employers noted costs associated with the provision of appropriate accommodations. And with regards to partnership, 90% of the employers indicated that they were interested in collaborating with the Ministry and National Employment Service. So, Mr. Vice President, the question could be asked, what is next? At the policy level, the Ministry has conducted 22 national stakeholder consultations, which would inform the amendment of our labor legislation framework with the aim of creating a modernized system under which all citizens, including persons with disabilities, would have their rights to execute responsibilities and to live a decent quality of life. As part of this exercise, the Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development has developed draft policy positions in respect of setting employment standards, which will inform an employment standard bill, Mr. Vice President. The spirit and intent of this bill is to protect employees from, amongst other things, discrimination in all forms at the workplace. One such protection is proposed in respect of preventing an employer from discriminating against a worker or an employee due to his or her gender, race, religion, age, ethnicity, and disabilities. At the strategic level, the ministry is working in close collaboration with the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services to develop the appropriate strategies that would give effect to expanding the range of opportunities to persons with disabilities. Naturally, Mr. Vice President, this consultative process will result in the creation of new and improved range of programs and projects that would further strengthen government's commitment and support for persons with disability. Mr. Vice President, I would just like to share this real-life experience in my previous incarnation as the president of the Public Services Association several years ago. when there was a protest demonstration outside of National Flour Mills by persons with disabilities. We at the PSA, we did lend support to that association and its members. At that time, Mr. Vice President, the protest was against discrimination against persons with disabilities and the refusal to employ these persons. But you know, Mr. Vice President, we will not have that problem in this country. If each employer, and that was a call I made many years ago, if each employer hire one person with disabilities, we will have no persons with disabilities unemployed. As a matter of fact, at that point in time, Mr. Vice Chairman, being the president of the PSA and making such a call, we put our money where our mouths were by employing a differently abled person. And Mr. Vice President, I could say it here, it was a decision we never regretted, because that person became one of the most valuable employees of the Public Services Association, and he's still employed there to date. And what we would have done was armed him with the necessary training. There is a cost attached to it, but we do have a social responsibility, Mr. Vice President, in this regard. So I repeat the call that I made several years ago. If each employer employ one person with a disability, we will have no unemployment among persons with disabilities. Finally, in closing, Mr. Vice President, let us reflect on the inspiring words of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and I quote, "We know that equality of individual ability has never existed and never will, but we do insist that equality of opportunity must still be sought." I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Acting Leader of Government Business.
Sorry, oh my God. My apologies. Oh my God. Mr. Vice President, I beg to move that this House do adjourn to Tuesday, March 19th at 1:30 p.m., at which time we will consider the Companies Amendment Bill 2019. Thank you.
Honorable Senators, before I put the question on the adjournment, leave has been granted for two matters to be raised on the motion for the adjournment of the Senate. Senator Mark.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, it was almost 1 year and a few months that the Registration, Recognition, and Certification Board has been in a state of rigor mortis, almost on its way to death. It's death. Madam President, Mr. Vice President, rather, the Registration, Recognition, and Certification Board is one of the most, if not the most, important institution in the industrial relations process with respect to collective bargaining at the trade union level. Mr. Vice President, if you're familiar with the trade union movement, you will recognize that a trade union must be registered and must gain recognition at the level of the RR and CB if it is to bargain or to bargain on behalf of its members in a recognized bargaining unit. This board determines who is a worker under the Act. And if one cannot determine who is a worker, then, Mr. Vice President, disputes will pile up. And that is what has been happening at the level of the RRCB. Disputes have been piling up. And the reason for this, Mr. Vice President, is because this government that spoke in defense of workers for almost 1 year and 2 months has not been able, under Section 21 of the Industrial Relations Act, to take steps to get the appointment going of the chairman of the RRCB. What that means, Mr. Vice President, is that the board cannot meet. Certificates of recognition cannot be issued. And the government, like Rip Van Winkle, is sleeping and snoring. Whilst, Mr. Vice President, the workers are suffering, trade disputes are mounting, certificates of recognition cannot be issued, and the government is snoring on the mountain, in the mountains, Mr. Vice President. So Mr. Vice President, this is a very, very serious matter. It can be disruptive. Mr. Vice President, when the IRA was established in 1972 to replace the ISA of 1965, it was designed to promote industrial peace and economic stability in our country. And what has been happening, Mr. Vice President, is that through no fault of the trade union movement, through no fault of the employers of this country, through no fault of civil society, the government has refused to take action to appoint this RRCB. And Mr. Vice President, what is even, Mr. Vice President, it is like if the government has taken a decision to destroy, undermine, bury the entire trade union movement in this country. Mr. Vice President, you would have seen recently where 7 industrial court judges' contracts have expired and they are working like Jude and on special works, 10 days, and their contracts are only being extended by a month and half a month and 2 months. Why, Mr. Vice President? Because the government, again, has refused to renew the contracts of these industrial court judges. So, Mr. Vice President, this is a very important matter. And, Mr. President, you know what is more alarming? I went to the PNM manifesto. This group of what I call, I don't know if this is proper, but I was going to call them a collective group of morons. No. But I will withdraw it. I will withdraw it. I will withdraw it. I will withdraw it.
Senator Mark, 1 second. Even if you withdraw it, it is not for you to say it and then say you withdraw it. Right? That is not the correct and proper thing to do. So just be careful in the use of your words.
I advise you to join me and journey with me on page 68 of this outdated document of the PNM. Hear what they told the country when they mama-guide the nation to get their votes. Hear what they said, Mr. Vice President. They shall review the appointment process for judges in the industrial court to provide greater security of tenure. Where is that? Where is that, Mr. Vice President? That doesn't exist. But, Mr. Vice President, I want to tell you something. When we were in office, we brought two pieces of legislation. One, the Constitutional Amendment Bill of 2015, and the second one, an act to amend the Industrial Relations Act 8801. Both of these pieces of legislation enshrine and entrench the role of the judges and provided them with security of tenure. These pieces of legislation and the PNM, with the trade union movement, they riled up the trade union movement to oppose these pieces of legislation. And they were tabled in the parliament, and we were never able to pass them because we promised the workers that the industrial court judges must have security of tenure. Today, the judges of the court have no security of tenure. This legislation that we tabled here would have guaranteed them and enshrined that the Judicial and Legal Service Commission would have been the agency to appoint industrial court judges in Trinidad and Tobago. So they would not have had, Mr. Vice President, to be begging this government today. Mr. Vice President, trade unions are waiting to get their certificates of recognition. I got a correspondence in my mailbox from Tutor, where they applied for an agency shop order to represent workers at the Ministry of Education at the supervisory level. 7 years ago. 7 years ago. And they have now gotten their final way in February through a legal opinion to go forward at the level of the recognition board. But you know what has happened, Mr. Vice President? The board has written to Tutor indicating they cannot go forward because you know why? This government, this failure posing as a government, has refused for almost 14 months to appoint judges to the industrial court. They have refused to appoint, Mr. Vice President, members of the board of the Registration, Recognition, and Certification Board. They have refused to appoint a chairman of the board. Mr. Vice President, this is a travesty of democracy. This is a travesty of justice. And I call on the government to take action immediately, and not only to reappoint the industrial court judges, but take immediate steps to bring into being the Registration, Recognition, and Certification Board. Mr. Vice President, I thank you.
Small enterprise development.
Thank you kindly, Mr. Vice President. You know, Mr. Vice President, I sat here and observed my senatorial colleague, Wade Mark, full of theatrics, making certain demands, making certain reckless and incorrect statements, of which it is my responsibility to correct the records. Senator Wade Mark talks about the fact that there is no board in place at the Registration, Recognition, and Certification Board. And it's a travesty of justice. And that Tutor submitted its application 7 years ago. Mr. Vice President, Tutor submitted its application under the United National Congress, and they did not attend to that application, so that it falls to this government to address the application of Tutor. That's number one. Number two, Mr. Vice President, there is an old saying, those who live in glass houses ought not to throw stones. And I want to remind Senator Wade Mark and all the rest of them on that side that from the 12th of January 2014 to the 24th of February 2015, there was no RLC board in place under a UNC government for more than a year. But you want to come here and talk about travesty of justice? No, no, no. Come now, Senator Wade Mark. Mr. Vice President, I would turn now to responding to the question posed, because Senator Wade Mark ended up calling for something that he did not ask for in the motion. He asking for two things, the RLCB plus the terms and conditions of judges. I would advise him to file a separate motion with regards to the terms and conditions of judges at the industrial court, and we will oblige by providing him with the accurate information and not perhaps the figment of anyone's imagination. Ooh. Mr. Vice President, the Registration, Recognition and Certification Board plays a critical role in promoting the integrity and credibility of the industrial relations systems in Trinidad and Tobago. Through its determination of the appropriate and recognized majority trade union, the RLCB, as it is popularly known, is important in promoting the fundamental principles and rights at work, specifically that of freedom of association and the right to collective bargaining in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Vice President, the RLCB was established under Section 21 of the Industrial Relations Act of 1972 as amended. Section 21(3) and 4 of the IRA states as follows, and I quote, and this is Section 21(3), subject to this part, the minister shall appoint the chairman and other members of the board as follows. And I invite Senator Wade Mark and all his colleagues to pay specific attention to what I'm about to read. A, in the case of the chairman, a fit and proper person selected by the President of Trinidad and Tobago. Let me repeat that, Mr. Chairman. In the case of the chairman, a fit and proper person selected by the President, Her Excellency of Trinidad and Tobago, after consultation with such organizations or other bodies of persons as in his opinion are the most representative of workers and employers. And B, in the case of the other members of the board, 3 members being persons nominated by such organizations or other bodies of persons as in the opinion of the minister are the most representative of workers. Roman 2, 3 members being persons nominated by such organizations or other bodies of persons as in the opinion of the minister are the most representative of employers. And Roman 3, 2 members being persons jointly nominated by the organizations or other bodies of persons referred to in subparagraphs Roman 1 and 2. And number 4, Mr. Vice President, in respect of each member of the board, other than the chairman, the minister shall in like manner appoint an alternate member, and any such alternate member may, with the approval of the chairman, act in the stead of the respective member at any one or more meetings of the board, or in addition to such a member, where such a member is elected chairman under Section 26(2). Mr. Vice President, I turn to the current status of the Registration, Recognition and Certification Board. Mr. Vice President, the last term of the RLCB ended on February 24, 2018. And I assure you that the necessary steps with respect to obtaining nominations for the chairman and members of the boards are following due course. I want to remind my senatorial colleague that the appointment of our first female president is of recent vintage. And therefore, Mr. Vice President, Her Excellency had to settle into office before attending to this matter, and which required her to engage in a process of consultation consultation, Mr. Vice President, and my senatorial colleague, Wade Mark, should know that consultation is a time-consuming process, but it is necessary. And therefore, Mr. Vice President, recently I received the nomination of Her Excellency of the chairman for the board of the RRCB. The public officers under whose charge it is to communicate with organization is in the process of receiving nominees from the workers' organizations, nominees from the employer organization, so that the process can be completed. And as the line minister, I can take the necessary note to the Cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago for approval. So, Mr. Vice President, in closing, once due course is followed and Cabinet's approval of the membership of RRCB is obtained, the chairman and the members of the Registration, Recognition and Certification Board will be appointed and the work of the board will continue. This is not a government by whoops and vaps. We follow the law as laid down, and that is what, as the line minister, I have been doing. I thank you, Mr. Vice President.
Thank you, Mr. President, Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I turn to Vimcott. We have a rogue management and a rogue board and chairman in charge of a runaway organization in which there is abuse, mismanagement, thieving taking place at a level and at a rate that is unprecedented, that requires police intervention and action to bring about some justice at that particular state-owned state enterprise. Mr. Vice President, I have some documents that I have received. The information is rather shocking, surprising, and I dare say disturbing. And I do not want to believe that the minister in charge, Works and Transport, is not aware of what is taking place there, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, this company, through its acting CEO and chairman, who is, I call the heart, always on the compound, believing that he's an executive chairman. He's always there every day. Mr. Vice President, they took a decision, and I don't know if the Minister of Labor is aware of it, to retrench 21 workers. 21 workers. 21 workers who have been laboring in that place for 10 and 12 and 15 years. They have done that. And Mr. Vice President, I have a copy of a letter. I don't know workers could be eliminated. But look at the language to tell you the state of play at that company called Vimcott. Mr. Vice President, they have eliminated 21 workers. They have forced 5 of them to resign, and they have dismissed 2 of them. And they operate like in the bygone days of the movie Django. Django's are in charge of a place called Vimcott today. Another army officer is in charge of that place. What? A fellow called Bennett. Some Bennett fella. He's in charge, you know. Colonel, a colonel too. Mr. Vice President, let me share with you a letter of termination that took place. I wouldn't call the name of the individual. I have the names of the 21 workers. I can lay it bare here. I won't do that. Mr. Vice President, hear what they said. And I quote one paragraph. This is addressed to a worker. I'll tell you who is signed by, because I believe this person should be facing criminal charges. It is signed by the acting chief executive officer. What's the name of the person? Natasha Prince. She signed this. Here what she tell the worker, Mr. Vice President. Arising out of Vimcot's board of directors decision, I want the minister to tell this parliament if he gave a direction and a directive to this board to do the following. Arising out of Vimcot's board of directors decision to divest. The board takes a decision to divest Vimcot and to reduce its current expenditure. We have concluded, the board, that 40% of our workforce must be reduced. As such, it is with great regret that your position or service is one of several positions to be eliminated. Mr. Vice President, I want to repeat. As such, it is with great regret that your position as service advisor is one of several positions to be eliminated. Yes, what I'm saying is that they don't even understand IR. They don't understand human relations. So they use the word eliminated. Mr. Vice President, I want to tell you that what has happened at that company is that the chairman of the board and the managing director, acting as CEO, they are running this company as if it is their own private home. They are running this company as if it is their own private property. And Mr. Vice President, you know what is taking place? They take decisions whimsically, arbitrarily. So you know one of the decisions they took? NP is supplying them with oil because they repair state vehicles, police vehicles, buses. And if you have a private car and you want to go and get mashed up, carry there. Because they're coming back out. Mr. Vice President, you know what they did? They decided to stop using NP oil. So you are taking police cars there, you're taking PTSD buses, you're taking state-owned vehicles, and you believe that they are using NP oil to repair your car. No, Mr. Vice President. They took a decision. That is the chairman, and I'm asking the Honorable Minister to tell us if he's aware of this development, Mr. Vice President. He must tell us whether he knows of a company that is now engaged, and the name of the oil company is Intimitsu. That's the name of the oil that they're using. Where is this coming from? Yeah, I never heard about that oil in my life. Let me spell it for you, and let me put on the record. IDEMITSU, oil. And who is supplying that oil? A fellow by the name of Mr. Salim Bash. What company he has? Auto Planet. He has just taken over the supply of oil to supply. Because you know why? That company does its own thing. There is no supervision. There is no proper accountability at this company. And Mr. Vice President, they curse workers, they disrespect workers, they discriminate against workers, they use racial slurs against workers, and there is no accountability. We call for an independent inquiry and investigation into the operation of Vimcot, Mr. Vice President. And Mr. Vice President, I have a bundle of documents here that came in my mailbox about the corruption taking place at that place they call, and I call on the minister to act, otherwise I will. I call on the minister to take action on this matter, because I haven't come with a private member's motion, yes, to deal with all of this information. I am giving the minister enough time to get inside there, clean up that place, and bring a report to this Parliament on what is going on at that place called Vimcock. Mr. Vice President, there's an injustice taking place there. And it is time for the minister to act and to take action. Too much abuse taking place there. Too much looseness taking place there. And Mr. Vice President, this lady who is now the acting CEO, this company is losing money, Mr. Vice President. They are running, as the Minister of Finance says, on fumes.
You have 1 more minute?
Yes, Mr. Vice President. And it is our taxpayers' money that is keeping up this company. This one by a Mercedes-Benz, a new one. I want to know if the minister gave her the all clear to buy a car when the company is losing money. And the lady already has a car. So, Mr. Vice President, there is too much abuse taking place, thieving taking place, and a lot of corruption taking place in that company. And I call on the minister to intervene, take action, call a proper forensic investigation into that company, and take action once and for all. Mr. Vice President, I thank you.
Minister of Works and Transport.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, I really don't know where to start after listening to that very good plea. Mr. Vice President, Senator said that the chairman of VEMCOT spent a lot of time on the compound, and he is, like, you use the word called the heart. Well, I know this leader of Senator Mark spends a lot of time on this compound here. I wouldn't refer to him as called the heart. He spends every day here. He also brought a motion. Don't worry, I'm dealing with it. He also brought Mr. Vice President.
Senator Mark. Senator Mark.
Sorry. Answer the question.
Senator Mark. Please, Senator Mark. We are at the end of today's proceedings. Allow the minister to respond. You had yours to say. Now the minister is responding to what you have said. So let him speak. Minister of Works and Transport.
Talk now. Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Mr. Vice President, thank you for the opportunity as I rise to speak on this motion before us, which seeks to establish the need for the government to explain the decision of the Board of Management of VEMCOT, not VIMCOT, VEMCOT, to retrench 23 workers and the implication of such action on the viability of the company. Mr. Vice President, the motion was really on the retrenchment of 23 workers and not on where the Honorable Senator tried to take it about corruption and corruption. If you have corruption, bring evidence and we will take action. This government is about taking action on corruption, not encouraging it like the last regime. Mr. Vice President, if we want to talk about retrenchment, Mr. Vice President, we can talk about 2010. VEMCOT had 183 employees. In 2011, the previous government that Senator Mark was a part of sent home 70 employees. In 2011, they brought it down from 183 to 111. But there was a reason for it. So I'm not going to chastise the former regime for that, because when you're running a business and you're trying to make it profitable, from time to time you have to take certain decisions. But they reduced the staff by 70 without any sort of information. Maybe they thought that those 70 were P&M people. And immediately, I don't know what was the reason, but there was no reason for cutting it outside of the fact that there was some change in the business policies. However, Mr. Vice President, from the inception to current time, VEMCOT has accumulated losses of $70,963,533. This figure is at July 31st, 2018. And the company, in subsequent months, has shown no means of attaining profitability. Based on the issued mandate from the Cabinet, the government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, the overriding intention was VEMCOT maintain all vehicle fleets owned and operated by state enterprises, in particular fleets belonging to the protective service of the Ministry of National Security. Mr. Vice President, it is noteworthy that numerous cabinet notes outline a clear mandate that the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service is required to utilize VEMCOT services. Contrary to cabinet instructions, though, to date, the vehicle maintenance and fleet management function has not been centralized. That is to say, state enterprises were not mandated to utilize VEMCOT services by the representative line ministries, and subsequent from this have been sporadic at best. In addition to the issues previously mentioned, VEMCOT has been affected with low subscriptions from the few state enterprises that choose to utilize its services. These subscriptions have severely and progressively declined over the years and are presently at an all-time low. Mr. Vice President, consequently, VEMCOT has been subjected to low throughput, over-capitalization operations, as well as underutilizations of its facilities, equipment, and workshop staff for the reasons mentioned above. Further, the few state entities customers have repeatedly failed to pay for the services they receive, resulting in significant outstanding payment owed to the company amounting to millions. This has severely challenged VEMCOT cash flow position and crippled its ability to recover debts. Accordingly, VEMCOT has had to rely heavily on government subventions to sustain its operation, including the payment of salaries to staff. To further exacerbate the situation, due to the downturn in the economy, the government significantly reduced the subvention distribution to state agencies, including VEMCOT. Now, this is the interesting part, Senator Mark. In January 2017, the Parliament Joint Select Committee on State Enterprise, the JSC, informed that they were conducting an inquiry into the operations and administration of VEMCOT and requested certain information. Having submitted the information requested on February 7, 2017, VEMCOT was interviewed by the JSC. The panel on the JSC committee included Senator David Small, MP Fazal Karim, and Senator Lester Henry, and of course, the Honorable Senator Wayne Mark. Mr. Vice President, following JSC review of the information submitted, and as a result of the interview, the JSC submitted its fourth report, 2016-2017 session, 11 Parliament on VEMCOT, which was published on June 30th, 2017. Now, this is the committee that Senator Mark is very vocal on. The said report stated the following. Again, this is Senator Mark's committee. Page 7, under the heading, General Finding. Item 5. Based on the evidence provided, the committee, Senator Mark Committee, is concerned about the following, and I quote, A, that VEMCOT staff costs are unsustainable and will erode attempts to achieve a state of profitability. This is Senator Mark in the report. Page 1, under the heading, Summary of Recommendations, Senator Mark Committee. Item 6, VEMCOT conduct a manpower audit with the objective to reduce staff costs at a level that is more in line with operational capacity, Senator Mark Committee. Page 12, listen.
Senator Mark, you know fully well that there's a very short period of time for matters on the adjournment.
I need injury.
You, as in the person moving this motion, had your 10 minutes and your opportunity to speak. upon which the minister would have listened and is now responding. So what is happening is that you're interrupting the minister when he's responding. Please don't let it happen again. Minister of Works.
I know it's hard, I know it's hard, Senator Mark. Page 12, under the heading Human Resource Capacity, item 22.9. Based on the evidence provided, the committee is concerned by the following, Senator Mark Committee again, that VEMCOT staff costs are unsustainable and will erode attempts to achieve a state of profitability. Having given the due consideration to the above, the Board of Directors, at its meeting held on November 30th, 2017, directed that a manpower audit be conducted, as recommended by Senator Mark Committee. In the interim, however, a revised organizational chart was requested to guide the validity this process, which officially commenced on May 25, 2018. In keeping with the revised strat plan 2017 to 2020, approved by the Board of Directors in April 2018, and on the recommendation of the JSC Senator Mark Committee again, management restructured the company in an attempt to ensure synchronization with the operational capacity. Accordingly, a revised organization chart, which sought to reduce the workforce from approximately 83 to 63, was developed by management and unanimously approved by the Board of Directors. Yeah. I'll take up 3 minutes just for the interruption.
There's no injury time.
I have some more licks for him.
Members, it's getting a little loud, and there is no injury time for these procedures, which is why it's important when a member is speaking to have silence. Minister, continue.
Senator Mark, I think I give you enough licks on this motion. Mr. Vice President, let me just close. I give him enough there. In summary, I wish to point out that the retrenchment of staff to downsize VEMCOT was followed through on one of the many recommendations made by the JSC, Senator Mark Committee, with a view to overcome the present challenges and emerge as a viable organization. The company is now focusing itself to emerge as a viable state enterprise by increasing its shares of private customers and enter into new commercial partnership with state enterprises. Given the present trend, particularly as a result of a prudent management, the company is now poised to become a self-sustained state enterprise for the very first time in its history. Yes. Mr. Vice President, I thank you.
Honorable Senators, the question is that this Senate do now adjourn to Tuesday the 19th of March at 1:30 p.m. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. This Senate now stands adjourned to Tuesday the 19th of March at 1:30 p.m.
Hey boy, so Bennett, eliminated the